Welcome to The Room, where real talk becomes real faith. Today, we're finishing up on a topic called Transformational Marriage. Now, part 2. In our last episode, we had such a great time unpacking sacrifice and serving. Today, we're going even deeper. We're covering devotion and duty in a marriage shaped, renewed, and grounded in Romans 12. My name is Ashley, and once again, we have Brandon and our special guests, Pastor Matthew and Rochelle Smith. We are ready to get into it, so grab your Bibles, open your hearts, and let's break it down with scripture, real talk, and zero fluff. This is Transformational Marriage, Part 2. All right, so we had such a great time with Transformational Marriage, Part 1. We all know Part 2 is going to be way better, so I'm excited to see what we get into today. It's going to be a little bit touching on devotion and in duty. But before we get into that, there's a little bit more we wanted to unpack with Romans 12:2. So I'm going to go ahead and recap for those of you who may not have been able to join us last week. But Romans 12:2, NIV version, goes as this. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And if you haven't had a chance to watch part 1, either go back or make sure you watch it after this, because there's some really good stuff in there to tag on to Transformational Marriage. Pastor Matt?
Well, Ashley, glad to be here again. Let me just say that. And I've been giving a lot of thought to Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, as it relates to the marriage and specifically the transformational marriage. And I see in this passage, it's a relationship passage, number one, but I see in this passage this matter of we talked about a transformational marriage and transitional marriage, and perhaps at some point we can talk about a transparency marriage. But with regard to this transition and transformation, what I see in this passage that Paul is getting at is that there must be a certain type of devotion that drives the duty and or performance in the marriage relationship. And most often we see a lot of duty and performance, but we don't see the devotion that's necessary in order for a marriage to actually transform. And I'll say this, that transformation really starts with our relationship with God. It really does. And we'll get to this, but I have taken the liberty to write some notes that I really want to share, which is not necessarily my custom to do so, but I did not want to miss any of the special revelation that God was giving me concerning this transformational marriage today.
Absolutely.
So
looking forward to it.
Can I dive into a couple of these things? We talk
do it.
about Romans chapter 12, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your body a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. In some translations, it says spiritual service. In some translations, it says your rational service, which means that this sacrifice and this service is a very thought out thing. In other words, we're not just doing this mindless. We're doing this with some intentionality. We're doing this with some thought involved in it. It's spiritual and it's reasonable, but it's also rational. We're thinking about what we're doing. Because keep in mind, when Paul talked about this matter of sacrifice in general was not something new to the Jewish people. In fact, they understood sacrifice. This matter of living sacrifice and submitting or presenting your body as a living sacrifice was revolutionary with most people, with probably all these people that actually heard it. So what Paul is calling for in marriage is for us to give ourselves over to him. And here's the other key. Willingly give ourselves over and not grudgingly, right? When we think of grudgingly giving something, most often we think about giving money, right? Giving our tithes or our offering. But I just believe in the presentation of what we give to God should not be done grudgingly, including the giving over of my body.
Right.
And that's very important as it relates to this matter of the transformational marriage, because I've got to give myself over to God if I'm going to be successful in my marriage relationship. It starts with me giving up to him. Remember I said last time, it's not a matter of giving things or giving in. It's a matter of giving up. I shared that, I think, at the most recent Marriage Keepers. We got to give up ourselves to God, not just give things to God. So that's how, I think about transformation. That's what I think about, giving up.
And you can really tell the difference just on a very basic level, right? When you ask your spouse to do something and it comes with all the grumblings, but then it's like, well, I did it.
Yes.
It's like, well, I almost rather you did it now. Like,
Right.
And so, there's a difference, like you said, between just doing it and giving it and not being devoted to it and just,
Right.
I did it, there, like, get off my back. Get off my back, God, like, I did it for you. And it's like, you can be like, well, did you know me at all? Because
Right.
I didn't ask you to do it like that.
Yeah, and not doing it grudgingly, to your point, right? You want to desire to do that. And I think going back to the sacrifice piece, I know you mentioned it last time about when you get married, you go to the altar, and that's where your sacrifice happens, right? I think that's so important to understand, because there's been a lot of studies that show those who are married, who are intentionally putting the time in to give that and to help build a marriage with their spouse. Those are the ones that last longer. It's the ones that really want to do the work, right? So, I mean, it's really about, you put good in, you get good out. So however much you put into a relationship is how much you get out. There's been a lot of studies done as well when it comes to marriages versus those who are cohabitating, right? Because when you're in a marriage, you're in a covenant agreement, you are forced to give more, right? And then in doing that, you have that service to your spouse, and you grow to love them more. And then in doing that, it makes you want to do that even more. It's like a cycle that continues to give and give and give. Now, the contrary to that is if you're not necessarily wanting to give, then that cycle breaks, right? And then you want to pull back.
Sure.
And that's kind of where you see some of the marriages falling apart sometimes.
Yeah. Brandon, the other piece is devotion versus duty and how that all ties together in this transformational marriage. Devotion, when you talk about devotion, you talk about sacrifice. What I discovered in the marriage context is a continual sacrifice. So it's not you sacrifice a day and then, you know what, I've done enough. There is no doing enough when it comes to sacrifice and devotion, right? You can do enough when it comes to duties, but you can't do enough when it comes to devotion. That devotion means that I am continually making sacrifice, and the sacrifices that I make ultimately are altering my life and transforming my life. It's very different than duty, right? Because you and I, as husbands, and Ashley and my wife as wives, they can perform a lot of duty things, and we can perform a lot of duty things. But if they're not done with devotion,
That's right.
commitment to God, love for God, I'm worshiping God as I'm doing this. This is my worship and reasonable service to God. This is my rational service to God. I'm intentional about this worship, and I'm doing it out of devotion, not duty.
And so I'll take a pause there really quick to kind of not theological, but a dictionary definition of devotion: love, loyalty, or enthusiasm for a person, activity, or cause. Then you head over to duty, and nothing wrong with this, but the very different terms: a moral or legal obligation,
Yes.
a responsibility, or a task that someone is required to perform. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rochelle?
Well, I'm glad you actually read those definitions because you talked about the obligation, right? And I think we talked about this earlier, doing something grudgingly. And we're doing it out of obligation because it has to be done or because I need to check a box. Even in our relationship with God, sometimes things are done out of obligation and not out of devotion or our love for God and our commitment to God. And so, unfortunately, that also translates in our relationships versus doing something with enthusiasm, right? Our devotion to one and to our spouses come from our devotion, or should come from our devotion to that person and our lifelong commitment that we've made to that person. And part of that devotion is also our commitment to sustaining our relationship and to growing our relationship and to building on our relationship. It does bring with it enthusiasm. Do you get upset sometimes and get frustrated along the journey? Absolutely. But the goal really is still to do and to share and to interact with enthusiasm as much as possible in the relationship.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because, right, there's nothing wrong technically with a duty, right? Like you have a moral or legal obligation to
Sure.
uphold this and to do these things, but you just don't want to falter too far in that direction. Again, where it's like nobody wants like a cookie cutter, right? Like, I mean, you've seen people that somehow that's just how they operate. They're almost like robots, right? And they're like, well, I have to do this and I have to do that. But then they're void of that lack of like the personal service and gratitude. And so it kind of removes, it always, I think every podcast we talk about, it goes back to intentionality. You don't want somebody who's doing it without intention.
Yes.
It's great that they're still doing it. You can still be a great partner, but if there's not that, you're not excited to do it. You don't, there's no love behind that. And
Well, Ashley, you're spot on with that. You know, to love your wives as Christ loves the church. Brandon, it's a duty, right? That's a duty.
Required.
Wives, submit unto your own husbands. That's a duty.
Yes.
But the way you do that should be driven by the devotion. And in devotion, you talked about love and loyalty and passion with intentionality and all that good stuff. That should drive how I perform that duty should be driven by my devotion and love. You know, love your wives as Christ loves the church. Yeah, it's a duty, but tied in that is a devotion that says, I'm going to love her as Christ. That's the devotion part, right? I'm going to love her as Christ. Yes. I'm going to love her as Christ because I'm devoted to Christ's method of loving her.
Right.
That's devotion and duty, right? Not just, you know, as you said earlier, Ashley, it's not just doing it to be doing it. Because when we do it to be doing it, we do it very haphazardly.
now I'm going to stop you right there because a question that came to mind. Seasons come and go, right, in marriages.
Sure.
Sometimes those feelings are not going to stay as passionate, as enthusiastic. And so, excuse me, how do you keep your heart devoted? And this could be, vows can be seen almost as duties, right?
Yes.
Vows.
Yes.
The words themselves are duties, but the feelings behind it maybe is the devotion. So how can you rekindle the devotion and respark those feelings maybe when you're going through those periods where it feels like you're like, well, I'm going to do my duty because I have to fulfill this, but you don't want to go for it for too long, right? Like you don't want that to just be a action and habit that you're doing.
I would say consistency, right? We mentioned last time, you know, radical change happens through radical principles, right? Principles don't care about your feelings.
No,
right?
they don't, Brandon.
They don't care about your feelings.
Not at all, brother. They don't care what you think.
No matter what's going on, you have a duty required to do these actions, principles, etc. throughout your marriage as your role as a husband or a wife, right? Your devotion, I have another definition that says it's selfless affection and dedication to a person or principle. So the two key words there is selfless and principle, right? Same thing with forming habits. There's books out there for even leadership talk about how do you form habits, all about consistency, day in, day out. Whether you feel like it, whether you're tired, whether you're hungry, you sleep, it doesn't matter. Staying to those principles will help you to weather those storms and will give you long-term benefits. Same thing with working out, same thing with anything else. I think the marriage is following those principles, and that's how you're able to weather those storms.
So are you saying consistency will allow for those feelings to flow more easily?
Exactly.
Okay.
Here's what I would ask, and this is rhetorical. Yes, consistency. But according to this passage, consistency in what? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Paul answers that because he does not give a deadline to sacrifice. He says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, that you present your body a living sacrifice. He doesn't say, sacrifice until, it feels good. And, I'm going to put this,
Right.
I'm going to put this, this date on it. You got to December 24th. Don't worry about it no more. You're good after that. No, consistency in sacrificing and selflessness, it will never stop. And I would say this to any person that's considering to get married. Please understand that selflessness and sacrifice is always going to be required. It's not a request, it's a requirement if you're going to be successful in transforming yourself and transforming your marriage into what God wants it to be. And one more thing. Our marriages are designed by Him to reflect God.
That's right.
And that requires constant sacrifice and consistent sacrifice of oneself.
So Ashley, you talked about the times, right, the seasons in our relationships where we perhaps don't feel like it, or maybe, that passion or enthusiasm isn't there any longer. When we get to those places, we typically know it. We may not discuss it with our partner, our mate, but we know when we're in those places. And I do believe that part of the scripture, or the intent behind the scripture that Pastor Smith read, is also our personal responsibility in this transformational state that I'm in, that I'm constantly in, that I have a responsibility also to understand where I am along in that journey, right? If I'm not feeling it, or I'm not exhibiting the same passion for my husband as I once was, where in this situation or this journey am I? Where am I? What is my role, and what role am I playing in this state that we may find ourselves in?
Right.
And if I'm along this transformational journey, that transformational journey also has to include me doing some self-reflection,
Right.
and seeing where I am. Am I contributing? Am I perhaps the cause? Am I just not doing what I used to do? He may not be doing what he used to do either, but am I not doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And while we're together along this journey, I still have a responsibility to ensure that I'm doing the very best and giving the very best. And so my transformation has to include me doing some self-reflection and ensuring that I'm upholding and I'm standing and I'm fulfilling that scripture, whether he is or not. And I think when I realize that I'm in that place, or that we are in that place where we're just not giving as much or not as passionate, or that we are doing things out of obligation and duty, I have to step back and ask God to help me.
Right.
Help me to continue to move forward. Help me to continue to see myself where in the areas that I need to grow, or that I need to build or rebuild, or perhaps transform again, or reshape, my thinking, or reshape some aspect of the relationship that perhaps has faltered and caused us to be in that place.
There's so when you go through premarital counseling with Pastor Keith, he goes in, Brandon can attest to this. There's a portion on conflict resolution, and you think of it, right, as pretty simple. It might be like, oh, I'm a great communicator, or I know how to talk about things, but really like putting out a plan and agreeing to that with your spouse. And if you didn't go through premarital counseling, that's okay. But I liked the idea, and me and my husband and I wrote this out. It's harder to put into practice, but maybe if you're at that point where you're further along in your marriage, and sometimes it's hard to bring things up, because, right, that's the first step, is if something is going wrong, you have to address it. You can't just suffer in silence.
Yes.
How can your partner help you or help transform that if you're doing it on your own? But the principle is essentially you can pick a day of the week where you can sit and talk. So that way both parties can come with things, and it's already a set aside time of the day, so nobody feels like you're coming to them right after you got out of work or just out of the blue, and you want to talk about something, and they're like, whoa, I didn't know there was a problem. It's like, okay, we agreed on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Let's go ahead. Do you have anything you would like to say? Do you have anything you would like to say? And maybe there's nothing, or you do it once every 2 weeks if once a week is too much. But that way it's an agreed upon time where nobody feels that conflict. But the step even before that is self-reflecting and saying, is this really an issue? Do I want to bring this to the table? Is this something that I can just change my heart on? Is there something where I can put myself in his shoes first and say, well, maybe he's doing that because of X, Y, and Z, right? Like, before I make this a big deal to bring it to our Thursday meetings, is it something that I can move past, go about it and talk about it with God? And so it's just like an interesting, self-reflect, talk about it with God, and then bring your spouse into it if it's something that you truly are feeling like, because we can go through different things, right? You maybe are feeling those things because of things that have happened, or you may be feeling those things because you're going through a mental health crisis. And neither of those are easy, but they still require help to move past and to transform that.
That's great advice. I really like that. Setting aside a time helps because you and your spouse could be very different. Could be introverted versus extroverted. Extroverts tend to think faster on their feet. Introverts tend to think through things and ponder them. So if you have a set time, it's like, oh, I know this is coming up. Let me get ready. Because you might need that time to get ready versus boom, 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 boom. And it's like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that, right? The self-reflection piece, I think, is key, right? Self-reflection roots out selfishness, right? You cannot, acknowledge your own selfishness or self-centeredness until you self-reflect.
Right.
And that's a facet not just for marriage, it's for life in general.
Right. And sometimes you still learn that, right? Especially as newlyweds, maybe you don't know that about yourself yet, right? Like you've done life by yourself this whole time, and so you're like, oh, rah, rah. And then like the more you talk about it, you're like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was.
Right.
And so you don't have to feel bad if sometimes your desires and needs are coming out of selflessness. But you do that with time. You're like, do I want to talk about it? Do I not?
Yeah, and part of that conversation has to be, as you talked about, Ashley, also, it has to be the two of you coming together and being able to say, well, that was selfish.
Right.
Because you may not recognize it, and they may not recognize it, especially if you've been independent for a number of years, your adulthood, and then you come together in a marriage. You don't know that you're being selfish. You're doing what worked for you all this time. So you've got to be able to talk about it, and you have to be able to create a safe space to be able to share that was selfish, or I felt that was selfishly motivated.
Right. And you have to be able to provide that feedback in love, because typically that's the personality of your spouse. And if you want them to grow and to transform, you have to be able to be open and honest. And it's not going to be the same for everybody, but maybe that's just a tip for some people who are listening, who maybe is like, well, every time I bring it up, she shuts it down. Or every time she shuts down, she doesn't know what to do. I don't know how to talk. And it's like, well, maybe you just propose that and you try it out for a little bit, because I know that's how it is in our marriage. I like to just get things off my chest and put it out into the air, but Renee likes time to I'll say something and be like, but then he needs time to think about it. I'm like, so what do you think about that? Let's talk about it right now. And he's like, no, and then he'll come later and be like, so I was thinking blah, blah, blah. Or he'll come out of the blue and be like, hey, what happened, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll share his piece from it, which is taking time for me to respect how he chooses to process things. And he also understands that sometimes if it goes through my brain too much, it may need a little bit more of an urgent response.
Ashley, I think that we are, I mentioned before that transformation is both immediate and progressive. And sometimes I don't think that we take into account the progressive piece and what that really looks like in our marriage. That's a time issue. In other words, we are constantly changing in our marriage. And I mentioned this last time, we're not the same people that we used to be. And this process is progressive, and we're going to constantly be changing. And the reality is that we have to change, because our wives and husbands are changing, and we're going to have to make some adjustments in the way we communicate. I find more now that I'm pondering things, and I'm an extrovert, but I ponder a lot more now. And I'll sit and I'll be listening. I'll be like, and sometimes I'm saying, I wish she would hurry up and get on through this now, because, I got some things I need to do. But I'm sitting, and I'll go in my office and ponder. I go to the driving range and hit golf balls. I'm pondering. I'm hitting golf balls, but it's a thinking place for me, right? And I find that the more I mature and get older, I find myself, part of my transformation is me internalizing and thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it, because I can be quick on my feet and say a whole lot of things, right? They're not always going to be advantageous or beneficial, but I can kind of come quick with it, and that's not always a good thing. You need to sit. Sometimes you just need to sit in here to think about what your mate is saying and not give an immediate response. I think my wife told me recently, she was sharing something with me, and I was just listening. And I think she thanked me for not giving a solution. And while I'm listening, I'm like, I got that figured out already. I'm like, why are we even talking about this? I can figure this out for you in 2 minutes.
Right.
But sometimes our mates, when it comes to communication, I know we can throw a lot of things in this transformation thing. Even when it comes to communication, there are lots of times that people aren't necessarily looking for us to give them a solution.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes they just want to talk. Mm-hmm. And in many cases with my wife, she can probably come up with the answer, for the most part. So I'm just listening just to be, kind of just listening because she needs to be able to talk and share. It's a part of the progressive thing in a relationship. And as we grow in our relationship, I bet God is, sometimes I bet I'm just going to listen to this guy. I'm just going to listen to this guy. I think I got enough faith in him. He's going to come up with the right answer. He's going to get in the word, and he's going to hear my voice, and boom, there it is. I'm not going to have to say anything. I wonder, you never know. But I think sometimes we just need to just sit. You know,
And it can be helpful being the other person who is, right, like either talking or expressing. You can always start your conversation with, I just need you to listen.
yes.
And you can set them up for success because sometimes you do want a response and sometimes you don't. And you don't want to make it, well, every time you say you don't want something and now you want something and that turns into whole. But you can prep the conversation for
Right.
success because I'm a huge verbal processor. Like everything
Me too, Ashley.
is like, that comes into my brain. I'm like, all right, I got to get it out because if I don't, I'm going to be anxious about it. And like, that's not going to help anybody. And sometimes I have to talk about it multiple times, right? And, bless Renee because he has to be like, we already talked about this. But like sometimes he's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm like, okay, we'll say something because now I need like an actual, but like I have to help set him up because I know my antics and they're not always consistent and recognizing myself
good.
and
That's
my
actually very good.
selfishness and needing a response out of that is not always, like you just got to help them out. Sometimes just give a little, our spouses aren't mind readers. At the end of the day.
Set them up for success. I like
It's part
that.
of the grace that we give to our
Right.
spouses, right? Is to set them up for success, even if it's really for you,
Right.
for your benefit. You need to share and you want to get it off your chest, and you may want a response for him, but helping him to understand or to hear you better by creating a platform for him to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah, that's good, actually.
I know with it, there's so much to unpack with the transformation, and I think, if we want to dive into a little bit on the difference between true transformation and just modification of our actions and maybe what that looks like a little bit.
There's a lot to be. I mean, we're diving really into the meat now of this matter of transformational marriage versus modification. And I think that the primary difference between modification and transformation is related to, I think I was sharing this earlier with Brandon, is related to the scope, depth, and the outcome, right? That's going to be the primary differences between modification and transformation. And I believe that most marriages, we specialize in modification. In fact, I'd say that a lot of believers probably focus more on modifying behavior. Not so much about changing my behavior, but if I can just modify this a little bit, I think we'll be okay. And that moves into our relationships, not just our relationships, but our marriage. It moves into that area. So I wrote some notes, and I want to kind of share about each of those three things, those primary differences, if I may. The first thing that I said was the scope. Scope, when you talk about modification, involves small incremental changes to something existing. It would be similar to like updating the software in my phone, right? It's a modification thing. Whereas transformation, when we talk about the matter of scope, is a large-scale systemic shift affecting the entire structure of a thing. That's a big difference right there. When you think about the scope and when you think about depth, when you talk about modification, it involves surface level changes. But transformation involves fundamental identity change. It deals with something a lot deeper than surface-oriented things. And then when you talk about outcome, modification usually results in improvements or refinements of an existing state, but transformation results in a new state or a new identity, making the object often, listen to this, unrecognizable. The case being 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. We talked about this, metamorphosis. The caterpillar becomes a butterfly. That's total transformation because a butterfly doesn't look nothing like a caterpillar.
Right.
That's the idea of transformation in a marriage. I should not look like this and perform like and have the same attitudes like I used to have before meeting Christ. I'm constantly transforming into something magnificent that doesn't, I hope to my wife that I'm not the same guy I was 37 years ago. If I am, Houston, we got a problem. And I encourage you to leave right now. Really, I shouldn't look like the same person. Well, physically, I still look the same, but you
For
know.
all our younger peeps, it's like going through the different phases of Pokemon. You should be leveling
Right.
up
Yes.
to the final,
Yes.
You don't want
Exactly.
to be stuck on level 1.
That's right.
Exactly. So that's the idea of transformation. There's a different scope, there's a different depth between those two, and there's a different outcome. It's a huge difference. Completely transformed. Brandon, when you got saved, I don't know how long you've been saved, but you're not the same person.
No.
You might look like the same person on the outside, but there is something remarkable that is taking place on the inside that, man, just influences everything else on the outside. The way we perform in our marriages is now influenced on the inside.
So now this all sounds, right, like you said, he looks the same, but is different. And we should be transforming ourselves all the time.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like practically for somebody who may be feeling, right, discouraged at this moment in time? And, because it's not going to be an overnight change, right?
Mm-hmm.
We should be different and we should be renewing ourselves. But, of course, we know realistically that takes time. What's your advice?
You want to take a stab at it? I got something to say about verse number 2. I can tell you that.
Well, you say go ahead and share verse 2.
Verse number 2, and Ashley, you read this earlier, and I think, Brandon, you said this last time we got together. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the what? Renewing of your mind. In a very practical sense, Ashley, I am constantly trying to renew my mind. I'm constantly going through this process of renewal and making change. So in a practical sense, a renewed mind might look like, there were some things that I wasn't performing early on in our marriage, but now I'm performing those things. My patience might be better now. My forgiveness, hopefully, is better now. My wife's forgiveness should, and those are very practical things when you think about forgiveness and what that means.
Right.
How do I extend forgiveness with this renewed mind or this renewing of my mind? And that renewing of the mind really comes through, reading the word and being in fellowship and being in community and all those things. Because I can tell you, without those things, that mind is not being renewed and regenerated. But once you are involved in those things, involved in the word, that renewed mind, it moves into or transitions into, in a very practical way. I really believe the mental shift has a lot to do with not just how we think, but how we perform what we're thinking. How do I, demonstrate this love for her in a practical way? Could it be washing dishes, taking out the trash? Could it be making the bed? Could it be vacuuming the house? Could it be cleaning the floors? My wife and I, most recently, because of the fashion show and everything, we were cleaning the house. And she had given me an assignment. And I didn't like that assignment, but I had to perform my assignment.
There, right?
I had to perform my assignment, So practical things in the marriage could look different for many people, depending on the level that you're in your marriage.
And so you said something at the beginning, in answer to that sparked the light bulb to turn on in my brain, is if someone's feeling discouraged, right, they're not seeing the transformation either in themselves or their partner, and maybe namely their partner, but it's the renewal of your mind. So even if maybe your partner or your spouse is not, the transformation isn't happening what you think, you transform your mind, it's going to change how you outlook on your partner.
Yep.
And so giving them grace and allowing the space or praying for them or whatever it is, you may ask for this thing over and over and over again. And for whatever reason, they are not able to provide that for you or do that for you. The self-reflection or transforming your mind and say, okay, I may not get this, but let me look at all the other things, or let me think about really why, or how can I help him or her get to that space to be able to help me provide this, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. But changing your mindset is going to ultimately, then they will become a new creation. They will become transformed because now you've transformed them in your mind. And maybe not at a disservice to them, right? Because you can't live in la la land, but in actuality helping them to be a better spouse.
See them as though they've already attained that
Right.
thing that you're trying to
Right.
to do and help them through.
And it's going to change your mindset, which is going to make it more positive, and then everything's just going to bounce back and forth.
I would say
it's just
that
interesting.
the renewing of your mind, right, changes your outcome to them, right? And they can see that as an example for themselves. In the same time, one of the biggest barriers that we have in a relationship of any kind is frustration. We get frustrated sometimes.
Sure.
And usually frustration occurs from misaligned expectations.
Right.
So what you can do to help mitigate that is to set expectations. Hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm reading, I'm praying, I'm doing this, right? I would like the expectation for you to do that at some point, essentially, right? And then kind of go and kind of talk through that and make sure that you are aligned on what those expectations could be so that there's not that frustration. So as you're progressing through it, as you're iterating through it, as you're getting better and better and better, you're both able to progress without having that tension there.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point, Brandon. And to Ashley's point, I really like what Ashley just said. I'm gonna stretch that out a little bit. If I am working on me and there's transformation taking place within me, while I want certain outcomes, I think the transformation that's taking place in me is going to cause me to have a different outlook. Outcome is one thing. It's what I want my mate to get to. It's what I want to get to. But and that's outcome. But outlook, as I'm being transformed, I'm probably going to look at her through the transformation that's taking place in me. And you talked about extending grace. Well, if I'm realizing, verse 1 in chapter 12 of Romans, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, I want you to consider, Paul says, I want you to consider what God is doing in and through you before you start asking for things for other people.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
See, too often we want our mates to perform this, that, and the other, but it's not sifted through what God is doing in us.
That's right.
Sometimes we need to evaluate, hang on, God, you've been extremely merciful to me. I can give a little more grace to them in this area. They're not there yet, but I realize I'm not there yet.
But how do you realize that?
Yeah.
Self-reflection.
Self-reflection. Self-reflection. Looking internally.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, a quick question for the audience who's watching right now, or what are some ways that you try to rekindle the devotion or maybe spark a little bit of that passion and take a moment to be with your spouse? And I will also ask the same question to my fellow hosts.
I would say, for me, it's my love language is quality time. So in those times where I feel like we maybe haven't had time together or disjointed, I just like to come back together with him and spend time together. So whether we're watching a movie or we're just hanging out in the same room, just not necessarily doing anything in particular, that for me helps to rekindle things.
I think that's probably the most important thing to my wife. I rekindling things. I like to take a vacation. I like to go somewhere where we're just by ourselves, and whether just sitting in the room, which we rarely do, but I like to get out and walk with her in another country, and just get away from the hustle and bustle of society. Yeah.
I would say for us, probably both of those things combined. I mean, we do both love quality time. We do frequently go out for coffee dates or to go grab, because we'll share a meal a lot. We love food, but when we are really feeling like, hey, let's go sit down. Let's go to a little bit of a nicer restaurant. Let's go take some time and spend some time, maybe on a day off or just being intentional. And then I agree to being somewhere else outside of your hometown because there's just something new and fresh, and not everybody has that luxury, but maybe you go to a different side of town that you've never been on together, right?
Sure.
You have the Pearl here in San Antonio, or you
it's
drive a
pretty
little
good.
bit to Fredericksburg, and then you feel, almost like it's a space to be able to start fresh and be new because you're not in your same routine.
I hate to be redundant, but quality time is absolutely the same for us as well. It'll be more like cooking dinner together, right? The bonding time actually and I'm talking from scratch, cutting up the onions,
Okay,
tomatoes,
nice.
the whole thing. And then we do a movie night after that. So just some tips there.
I love
Bless your heart,
I love
Brandon.
It. Good job,
Right.
good job,
Bless your heart,
Brandon. Good job.
Brandon.
Good job.
Brandon's still young in his marriage, folks.
Yes.
No TV dinners, no work, all of that.
That's awesome.
My husband's love language is going to go pick up food for us.
Really?
That's a nice thing too.
Yeah,
that's a
'cause
good
it's
love
safe.
language.
Yeah.
You know, if I say I can't cook, he's like, okay, do you want me to go to Chick-fil-A? We're working on the home-cooked meals.
I hear you. I hear you.
But as we start to wrap up part 2, which was another great and invigorating conversation, we'll just go ahead and everybody share, start with Brandon this time, one point that you really want our viewers to take away today.
Yeah, I would say if I could give one piece of advice at a very high level, it would be just the principle of deferred gratification, right? So deferred gratification means you could have something today that you're deferring later on to get something even better in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's what marriage is at a very high level. We are investing in one person, right? It's very easy when you see everything going on with social media and all that, a lot of distractions, and when you're investing in one person, taking the time to work with them, to do these different things, to be selfless to yourself and develop yourself. And one of the main points of marriage is that both of the spouses are working together to make each other better Christians in Christ. That's hard, right? You're deferring the gratification of taking the easy route out and doing that. So I would leave that one message with everyone, is to really defer the gratification and look inward to build your marriage together.
So a quick question for the audience who's watching right now, or what are some ways that you try to rekindle the devotion or maybe spark a little bit of that passion and take a moment to be with your spouse? And I will also ask the same question to my fellow hosts.
I would say, for me, it's my love language is quality time. So in those times where I feel like we maybe haven't had time together or disjointed, I just like to come back together with him and spend time together. So whether we're watching a movie or we're just hanging out in the same room, just not necessarily doing anything in particular, that for me helps to rekindle things.
I think that's probably the most important thing to my wife. I rekindling things. I like to take a vacation. I like to go somewhere where we're just by ourselves, and whether just sitting in the room, which we rarely do, but I like to get out and walk with her in another country, and just get away from the hustle and bustle of society. Yeah.
I would say for us, probably both of those things combined. I mean, we do both love quality time. We do frequently go out for coffee dates or to go grab, because we'll share a meal a lot. We love food, but when we are really feeling like, hey, let's go sit down. Let's go to a little bit of a nicer restaurant. Let's go take some time and spend some time maybe on a day off or just being intentional. And then I agree to being somewhere else outside of your hometown, because there's just something new and fresh, and not everybody has that luxury, but maybe you go to a different side of town that you've never been on together, right?
Sure.
You have the Pearl here in San Antonio, or you
it's
drive a
pretty
little
good.
bit to Fredericksburg, and then you feel almost like it's a space to be able to start fresh and be new, because you're not in your same routine.
I hate to be redundant, but quality time is absolutely the same for us as well. It'll be more like cooking dinner together, right? The bonding time actually and I'm talking from scratch, cutting up the onions,
Okay,
tomatoes,
nice.
the whole thing. And then we do a movie night after that. So just some tips there.
I love
Bless
it.
your heart,
I love
Brandon.
it. Good job,
Right.
good job,
Bless your heart,
Brandon. Good job.
Brandon.
Good job.
Brandon's still young in his marriage, folks.
Yes.
No TV dinners, no work, all of that.
That's awesome.
My husband's love language is going to go pick up food for us.
Really?
That's a nice thing too.
that's a
'cause
good
it's
love
safe.
language.
Yeah.
If I say I can't cook, he's like, okay, do you want me to go to Chick-fil-A? We're working on the home-cooked meals.
I hear you.
But as we start to wrap up part 2, which was another great and invigorating conversation, we'll just go ahead and everybody share, start with Brandon this time, one point that you really want our viewers to take away today.
Yeah, I would say if I could give one piece of advice at a very high level, it would be just the principle of deferred gratification, right? So deferred gratification means you could have something today that you're deferring later on to get something even better in the end. And I feel like that's what marriage is at a very high level. We are investing in one person, right? It's very easy when you see everything going on with social media and all that, a lot of distractions, and when you're investing in one person, taking the time to work with them, to do these different things, to be selfless to yourself and develop yourself. And one of the main points of marriage is that both of the both of the spouses are working together to make each other better Christians in Christ. That's hard, right? You're deferring the gratification of taking the easy route out and doing that. So I would leave that one message with everyone, is to really defer the gratification and look inward to build your marriage together.
Yeah, I certainly like that deferred gratification idea, Brandon, as well. And that's centered in self-sacrifice as well. But I'd say my word would be, I prefer transformation over modification. The modification is just incremental changes. They have no depth to them at all. But transformation has to do with deep changes and systemic changes that are going to be significant overall.
And as we're going to continue to transform in our relationships and in our marriages, we have to self-reflect. So I absolutely would leave everyone with the reminder to self-reflect, and then also embrace your mate's growth. We absolutely have to be respectful of their growth process. It's not going to be the same for me, but as long as he's in a growth process, I have to respect that and I can embrace it.
Thank you for pulling up a seat with us today in the room. We hope today's conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you something deeper to think about. Don't forget to connect with us through social media, and if this episode spoke to you, share it and tag us. We'll see you next time for another relevant, faith-filled conversation. Until then, stay rooted, stay real, and stay in the room.